My name is Barbara Borden, um, and I'm hoping to talk to you tonight just a little bit about um, my experiences with OCD. I have had OCD my whole life, um, and also kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse into exposure and response prevention from a patient perspective. Um, so, so we'll go ahead and get started. And again, I do apologize for the late start. So, as I said, I've had OCD my whole life. Um, the first actual obsession that I can remember was at the age of 4. Had a panic attack for telling a friend at kindergarten something about my family. Um, it was something personal, but I did not know that as a 4-year old. And so I got in trouble, and that sparked an obsession in me that um, I could lose my mother's love if I did something wrong. Ages 4 through 17, I lived with OCD undiagnosed. Didn't know I had it. I knew something was wrong. I always felt sick to my stomach. I always wanted to be at home. I hated being in school. But back then, there wasn't a lot, there was no internet, there was no researching. So nobody picked up on the fact that I was struggling. And it was hard. Um, Mostly because, again, I didn't know what the problem was. I just know I felt horrible. I was afraid of getting into any kind of trouble. At age 17, I was at my first semester of college, and that's when I had my first hit and run obsession. And it was intense, it was prolonged. Um, I just couldn't imagine that I hadn't done it, because if I could think I did it and get so anxious about it, then I must have done it. Um, and that's what led me to get diagnosed. Um, so that led to an appointment at Butler Hospital with Dr. Rasmussen, and I started on SSRIs. From ages 17 through 22, I completed my first exposure group for children at Butler Hospital. Um, so that would have been 1988. And I say exposure group because the group had us face our fears and do what we were afraid to do, but there was no emphasis on not performing rituals along with working on the fears. So I had stopped driving after the hit and run um, obsession. And so I would have to drive around Butler campus, go over every speed bump, and I couldn't check my rearview mirror. Excuse me. From there, the obsessions got worse. A lot of fear of harms to others, which is the major theme that I struggle with. And OCD is not logical, and OCD doesn't it picks on what's most important to you. So, um, fear of harm to others is my major theme. Ages 23 through 44, obsessions were really less frequent. I'd have a few episodes of regression lasting maybe 2 weeks. Um, and then I had a long stretch of being symptom free. It was 4 to 5 years at the time. I completed my um, master's degree, no problems. I had no obsessions, no compulsions. And then at age 45, I had my first clinical depression. And we tried many medication trials, and the depression did not respond. So I did transcranial magnetic stimulation, which did work for me. After the depression lifted, OCD decided to jump in and have some fun. And it certainly was not fun for me. I had a very severe flare. It enveloped my whole life. I was an absolute wreck 24/7, and it resulted in 2 inpatient hospitalizations. So, through the undiagnosed years, these were the major obsessions that I can now identify, that were obsessions. Um, so again, mom will stop loving me if I share personal information. My compulsions for that were confess, seek a lot of reassurance. Um, I drove my mother crazy with what ifs. Um, it was difficult, real difficult. Um, One of the others, someone could be in the house in the dark. So I would wake my mom in the middle of the night to tell her I was going to use the bathroom. And I get that anybody listening to this that doesn't have OCD, I absolutely get how ridiculous it sounds. Um, but that's what OCD is. And when I'm in an obsession and it feels very, very real because you're so anxious. And your mind says, well, if you're that anxious, then it's something happened. And that's just the way OCD is, unfortunately. Um, I have one of the big ones for me, which was a daily one, was one of my family members would be hurt. Um, and so I had to do everything every day the exact same way. From the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, I had to do everything in the same order. And if, God forbid, something got in my way, um, I grew up with 5 brothers, and 1 bathroom. So if I didn't get up on time and someone was in the shower, but I needed to be getting ready for school, so I had to do things out of order. That entire day, I would be so anxious and so afraid that something bad was going to happen to someone in my family, and it was going to be my fault because I didn't do everything. Funny enough, my mom and I had a conversation not too long ago about my OCD and um, the undiagnosed years, because we had really never talked about what were my obsessions when I was younger. The hit and run one was the one that really got everybody kind of moving. But we had never really talked about some of the other things or the way it manifested for me. So she didn't understand why I always felt sick, why I always went to the school nurse to come home early. Um, and one of the things she said to me is that the one thing she remembers is I worked in a small restaurant and I would walk to work. And I would walk the long way, not only the long way, but probably the most unsafe way. Rather than walking out my door, going in the other direction, and being on a main road with sidewalks, shorter distance, I always took the same way. And she would get so mad with me. And I couldn't tell her why because I didn't understand why myself. Um, and so we were talking about it, and that's the one thing she remembers. And she said to me the other day when we were having the conversation, she said, I just thought you were a stubborn kid. And I said, no, it was part of, I had to do everything the same way. So that's what it was all part of. Um, some of the other obsessions, um, at one point, I believed I was a serial killer when I was sleeping. And I blame that on Oprah. For those of you listening that are young and don't know Oprah as anything but who she is today, the feel good guru, when she first came out with her TV show, um, it was a sensationalized show. So she had on serial killers and anything crime wise that was in the news. Those were the kind of people she had on. And so when I would get home from school, I would watch Oprah for a little while I got ready for work, and I would head to work. And so she had a gentleman on who was claiming that the people that he had killed, he had done it in his sleep and he didn't know. And so OCD grabbed that and said, yep, that's you too. You have no idea that you're going out in the middle of the night and you're killing people and you're coming home and you're getting back into bed and there's no evidence. But my God, what a horrible person you are for doing that. And my compulsions for that were I checked the news. I saw more local news shows in that first couple of years than ever before. And then I taped my bedroom door shut at night. So I would shut the door and I would put a piece of tape across the door. Again, OCD is not logical. So I don't know what that was supposed to do other than tell me if I left my room or not. But obviously, if I did, I could have just untaped and taped it back up. But OCD is not logical, so that's the compulsion that made me feel better about it. And then I also had, fear of house fire or theft, so checking door locks, checking appliances, checking ashtrays, checking the alarm clock to make sure I'm not going to oversleep. And then the biggest one was the hit and run. That's what made me um, get services, get diagnosed, start on SSRIs. Um, it was terrifying. I would check my car over and over again for any kind of scratches, dents, any evidence. I called police stations and asked if they had responded to a hit and run. Um, Watching the news again, calling hospitals. And it was probably the end of that first night that my mother noticed something was very wrong with me, that I was very upset. And so I told her what had happened. Living with OCD, it's not a disease that bothers, it's a disease that tortures. And again, I understand for people that don't have OCD, it is so hard to understand. We hear things like, well, just don't think about it. Or, you know, it's all in your head. But at the time that it's going on, it is real to us at that time. Um, I kind of like the bottom quote. I have two people in my mind. One is the actual me, and the other is the constant voice of OCD and anxiety. It's like having a bully stuck inside your head. You can't believe your own thoughts. So that brings us to 2017. And as I alluded to earlier, I had been in a pretty bad depression for almost 2 years. And OCD had left me alone pretty much for that time. But once I had the transcranial magnetic stimulation and it worked, then OCD decided to jump in. And so my kind of the obsessions going on at that time, again, the hit and run cause an accident, um, and compulsion avoidance, checking the car, but mostly avoidance. Just stop driving altogether. I just couldn't take the risk that it would happen, but I also didn't want to take the risk of feeling that way. So whether it was an obsession that didn't happen, it still felt like it happened. So it was just easier for me to avoid driving. So I didn't drive for 6 or 7, possibly even 8 months. Um, my brother had to drive me everywhere. And speaking of my brother, OCD likes to bring other people in as well. So I had an obsession that my brother would burn the house down when he was cooking or grilling. And so the compulsion was I would sit and watch him every time he cooked. And then when he was done, I would go behind him and check all the appliances and make sure they were off. Um, I had an obsession. My brother had pet lizards, and we ended up having to get rid of them because one of the enclosures caught fire when we were not home. And that, yes, that is one of my obsessions as well, that will happen and it'll be my fault. Um, so in rehoming these lizards, one of them apparently got away. And so I had the obsession that he's still alive, living in the walls of our house, and will get out and kill someone. We're talking about a lizard that was maybe 4 inches long. Now, granted, they grow to be humongous in the right environment, but the absurdity of it is lizards are cold-blooded. So there's no way that a lizard would be alive 15 years after it got loose. It There's just no way in our winters. Um, I had the obsession that someone was going to kick in the front porch door and kill us. And so I would stay awake all night. And I would have my cell phone with me with the dial 91 already punched in so that when the door came flying in, I could hit the last one, send, and get help. I would burn down the house with cigarette or embers from a cigarette. That's another kind of big one for me that stays with me. Um, and at that time, the compulsion was I had to stay in the room. If I had a cigarette, I had to stay in the room for 1 hour. And then I would have to check the floor all around the ashtray. And I would also just avoid leaving the house so that this wouldn't be a problem at all. So now I'm having all of these obsessions all day long, just absolutely tortured myself. And unfortunately, didn't respond to medications. And um, I was on the waiting list for the Butler Hospital IOP uh, program for OCD and anxiety, but the wait list at that time was several months. So for months, I lived with these things swimming in my head, causing me great anxiety and believing them. And so I shut down. I completely shut down. Um, the only time I would leave the house um, was with my dog Bella, and that again because I love my dog so much. That's also OCD picked up on that, and I have the fear that she get hit by a car. So I check her leash lead repeatedly, and after that stopped working as far as quelling the anxiety, then it meant I had to go out with her every time she went out. Um, Another obsession that I still deal with today, I'm going to say something that will profoundly hurt someone. So I do a lot of mental checking of conversations and a lot of reassurance seeking around that. And then also negative thoughts confirmed I was a bad person. So if I'm watching TV and I think I had a negative thought about someone of a different race, then I would automatically get anxious and think, oh my gosh, I really am prejudiced and I don't I'm just I'm prejudiced and this is what this is why. And so the compulsion for that was to neutralize negative thoughts by making positive thoughts. So I would purposely have to find something I liked or something nice to say about somebody on TV. And this is all in my head. I'm not speaking this out loud at the time. It's all in my head. Um, but I have to say something that I truly mean to be nice in order to prove that I'm not a racist or I'm not biased against any certain group. So these obsessions and compulsions were all running 24/7 for me by 2017. I very rarely left my house, and if I did, somebody else was driving, and I would hurry up and want to get home. And then it became staying up all night um, to be prepared for the people that were going to kick in the door and come and kill us. Um, And really, the only other time I would leave the house is to go outside with my dog while she was out there, which again was a compulsion. The thing with OCD is those of us that have it, we know that the things we do, the compulsions, we know that they're ridiculous, but we're driven to do them. We're not doing it by choice. It's not a character flaw. It's a mental illness. And it's really tough sometimes to get people to understand that again, at the time when we have an obsession and the anxiety goes up, we are living in it and we believe it. And it's horrifying. OCD doesn't just stop with the first obsession. So for hit and runs, for me, it doesn't just say, oh, you hit somebody. It goes on and it tells you this whole story about, at least for me, it it goes on about how my family is going to feel about me when they find out that I hit somebody and left, what it says about me as a person, how that would make me just a terrible person. But it goes on to kind of give a scenario of, okay, this is true, and this is what's going to happen. People aren't going to want to be around you anymore. People are not going to trust you. I might lose my family's love. These all feel real at the time, and I can't emphasize that enough. So finally in 2017, I went into the Butler Hospital um, intensive outpatient program for OCD and anxiety. So ERP is a form of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, used with OCD to reduce anxiety associated with obsessions through sensory habituation. It's like they say, it's facing your fears, but it's done in a systematic way so that you start little and build up to the main obsession or obsessions. The goal of ERP is not to change or rid yourself of obsessions. Instead, it focuses on decreasing the anxiety and discomfort associated with the obsessions. So we're not going to change the thoughts. The thoughts, the images, the obsessions, they're going to come. But after going through ERP treatment, you learn to relate to the thoughts differently. And you learn to sit with that uncertainty. So the process starts with developing a hierarchy of obsessions and ranking them from least disturbing to most anxiety provoking. So for me, we started with the smoking and I'm going to burn the house down. And so we designed exposures for items on the bottom of the hierarchy. And so they purposely expose me to going outside of Butler, having a cigarette, throwing it on the ground, and I got one chance to step on it. I couldn't step and turn my foot. I could just step on it. So I would do that, and I would go back upstairs and I would sit with that for an hour. And the whole time, my mind is racing, the anxiety's up. I'm thinking part of Butler Hospital is burning. I'm going to be in trouble for this. But as each day went on, the anxiety came down a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And so then once I got to the point where the anxiety for that was manageable, then we upped the ante, and it was I had to smoke at home and then leave the house for 15 minutes and record how anxious I was. On the first day, I couldn't even make it the 15 minutes. I walked out of my house and maybe made it to the next street, turned around and ran home. The next day, I got a little further, I got a little further, and within 2 weeks of practicing that, I was able to walk kind of around my block without being anxious. So in ERP, you perform exposures daily and you record subjective units of discomfort, or SUDs. And they're subjective because what's upsetting to me is not going to be as upsetting to the next person. So it's always subjective. And so generally for me, starting a new exposure, the scale is 0 to 10, 10 being the worst anxiety you've ever felt. And whenever we started a new um, exposure, generally my anxiety would be up there at about a 10. And the first couple of times, it might have only come down to a 7. But after 2 weeks, it was down to a 2. And I was out walking and not even thinking about the fact that I had had a cigarette and that the house might burn down. But then we had to move into the next step. So obviously, with smoking, it's hard to design any other kind of in vivo or in person um, exposures. And so the next step for that was to write and record an imaginal exposure. And that is allowing yourself to write down exactly what OCD tells you. So for me, it was writing down that I burned my house down accidentally because of smoking. And then you have to take it to the end. So what does OCD tell me from there? Well, that not only am I going to be homeless, my brother is going to be homeless, my neighbors upstairs are going to be homeless, and most likely they're going to be hurt pretty badly. And then what happens from there? Well, then again, my family might not want to be around me. The family members of my neighbors are going to be upset with me. I could be brought up on charges. These are all things that when you get wrapped up in an obsession, this is what OCD does. It just keeps telling you that what's going to happen and how bad it's going to be. And the longer the anxiety persists, at least for me, the more of a story OCD will tell me. So I have an imaginal uh, about fire um, recorded that I used to listen to for an hour. And the first time I listened to it, I cried. Um, Actually, I probably shouldn't say that. I got pretty um, I mean, I did cry, but I got very distraught, very, very distraught. And I was in with a group of people who are trying to do their exposures, and I am literally bawling like a baby. Um, so I'm going to try to play a little bit of it. I will forewarn you, this is graphic. Um, and I don't know if it's going to work, but hopefully it will. So this is what OCD told me about me setting a fire. I am leaving the house after just having a cigarette. While in the car, I have the thought that my house is on fire. Shortly after, Michael calls me in a panic and tells me I have to get home now. He tells me there's a fire at our house, but gives no other details. My anxiety is so severe while I drive home, imagining what the house will look like. When I get home, there are fire trucks blocking Bristol Ferry Road and Maggie Lane, and my house is totally engulfed in fire. My anxiety is very severe as I park the car on the street and look for Michael. I finally find Michael while the house is collapsing from the fire. Michael is in tears and starts yelling at me, saying this was all my fault. If I didn't smoke in, this never would have happened. I am looking around in a panic for Bella and Fidget, but don't see them. The fire marshal comes over to us and tells us that Bella's body has been found by the front door. She is dead. Fidget has not been located. The fire marshal explains that if the apartment wasn't so small, they might have had a chance to save Bella, but the fire had spread to the entire house before they got there. I am now hysterical and blaming myself. Michael is so upset, he says he can't even look at me and walks away from me. At this point, I am inconsolable when the fire marshal returns to tell me that Justin's body was found on his bed. I have now killed Bella, Fidget, Justin, Pepe, and Lahire, Justin's cats. I am a murderer. Michael leaves the scene, leaving me alone, inconsolable. This is all my fault. Michael never returns and refuses to take my calls. My mother reinforces that the fire was my fault and that I am a murderer. She tells me she never wants to talk to me again. The anxiety and sadness are overwhelming and extreme, and I have no one to console me. Okay, I'm going to stop it there because it gets a little more graphic towards the end. But that is the story that OCD tells me about what's going to happen and why it's going to be my fault. And it's when you're in it, it's hard. But in the ERP process, by learning to sit with the anxiety and the discomfort when the obsession comes in and not just automatically going to the compulsions, it gets a little bit easier. It gets a little less, OCD has a little less hold on you. And after time, if you keep working at it, then you move up the hierarchy, hopefully to a point where your functioning level can change. And I can tell you for myself, when I first entered the ERP process, these kind of were my reactions. So them telling me to go outside, have a cigarette, and throw it on the ground, I thought, like, you want me to what? And you want me to purposely possibly set something on fire? Um, and it just, every time there's new homework, there's a new obsession to work on. At times it gets a little scary. But I know now that I have the skills to live with this and not to let it take over my life. OCD no longer gets to win in my world. There are times when it maybe gets a couple of goals, not having a bad day, not feeling well. Sometimes the obsession may catch me off guard and I may get that anxiety feeling. Um, but I fight as hard as I can to sit with it and to not perform the compulsions. So what I learned from ERP, I am not my OCD. I live with OCD, but I'm not my OCD. What OCD tells me about myself and how horrible a person I am doesn't make it true. I learned that ERP staff are not mean, and I say that with a lot of love, um, because to the layperson maybe listening to this or um, hearing about um, an exposure, it sounds kind of cruel, but the results are can be wonderful. They really can. But there are times in the IOP where I would be given my exposure for the day, and I wouldn't be real happy about that because you're asking to bring up a lot of junk and you're telling me I can't do what I would normally do to quell that anxiety. Um, they're not doing it for fun. The staff are doing it so that you get better. The obsessive thoughts and images aren't going to stop. They're not. But I can relate to the obsessions differently. I can sit with the uncertainty. Can I do it 100% of the time? No. And I don't pretend to be. There are days when I give in. But the important thing is don't let it become a habit again. If you give in one time, for me, I'm having a really bad day, I don't feel well, and I all of a sudden get the thought that I hit someone, my compulsion would normally be to turn around and check. Well, I don't want to do that anymore because I know that if I do that, it doesn't end there. Going back and checking once only works once. And then you're spending 2 hours of your day driving back and forth to see if you hit somebody. So there's going to be days where you just can't do it. And I end up checking. I end up going back and looking. But only for that one day and only for that one obsession. By not performing rituals, I take the power away from OCD. Ritual prevention is a skill and it has to be practiced to be maintained just like any other skill. If you learn a foreign language, if you don't use it on a regular basis, then unfortunately, you're going to lose those skills. And I'm living proof of that because I took 4 years of Spanish, 4 years of French. I now get the two mixed up. I'll start saying something in Spanish and finish in French. And when I say saying something like it, something easy, like maybe counting to four, and I'll start in Spanish and switch to French, not even know it because I didn't practice. I let those skills go after those classes. Well, it's the same thing with ritual prevention. It's the same thing. You have to still do exposures. You have to still do not give in to the rituals. And I practice every day. And I practice different ones, whichever ones are coming up for me more. So more recently, the fire in the house has been an issue for me. It's been coming up a lot because my neighbors have a new baby upstairs. And so now I feel a responsibility to the baby as well. Um, so while the Imaginal I played for you is outdated and needs to be updated, I wasn't able to handle that, and recording it and listening to it were just really bothersome to me. So I now have a um, collage of photos with cigarettes and houses burning and babies, and I look at that, and then I do some repetitive writing about it, like I am a murderer, I am a murderer, I am a murderer, not giving in to the compulsion or what I want to do, or what OCD tells me I have to do, I should say, for um, to feel better. Avoidance feeds OCD. So by stopping driving in 2017, it made it that much harder for me to start driving again. So I had not driven, I want to say, for about 8 months. I joined the IOP program, and that was pretty high on my hierarchy. So we didn't start working on that until about 3 weeks in. And then it was baby steps. It was driving there with my brother in the car with me for a week. And then it could be then it was, driving so far by myself. And now I drive everywhere. The other things I've learned, obsessions may change over time. Um, we call that the whack-a-mole, where obsessions that you've never had before come up. For instance, I do not have contamination OCD today. Doesn't mean I won't get it tomorrow. And so that's why having a really good grasp of ERP is helpful. Because you know how to apply it to different situations. I also learned that I'm not alone, that I shouldn't give up, and you have to have a sense of humor. When you are tortured by your own thoughts and you do some pretty ridiculous looking things to try to quell that, um, in the moment, it's not funny. But if you can learn to look back and laugh, then you're doing okay. How my life changed after ERP. I had not worked in 2 years. Um, about 3 months after leaving the program, I began volunteering at a local nursing home. I became the peer facilitator for the OCD Support Group, which runs right after this via Zoom. I drive everywhere, especially right now because I'm not um, volunteering given COVID. So I will drive, I'll take anybody. Somebody wants to go run errands, let's go. My friend wants to meet in Providence, I'm on my way. Like, I love to drive, and I'm so happy that I have that back. I became a board member for OCD Rhode Island because I want to get the word out. I want to be an advocate and help other people in the same situation. I made many friends, and I now have a really strong support system. I socialize pre-COVID and hang out with friends, something I was not doing for a long time. And the bottom line, OCD does not get to win. I have the skills to bully back. And now that I have the skills, I'm not going to let them go. And I'm going to practice them every day, whether I'm having problems or not. I don't want to lose the skills that gave me my life back. And lastly, just a big thank you to Dr. Rasmussen, Dr. Mancebo, Megan, Morgan, Shaylin, my OCD friends, and all of the OCD and anxiety IOP staff for helping to make changes in the lives of all participants. So that is presentation for this evening. I know it was a little disjointed and I apologize for that. Having anxiety and having technical problems when you're supposed to be live um, is a little bit disconcerting and anxiety provoking, I will admit. I apologize if it was a little disjointed. I hope that it's helpful in some way. Whether you're living with OCD and struggling with getting the um, obsessions or getting the exposures, don't give up. There are people out there that want to help. And the bottom line is you don't have to live according to OCD. You can live your own life. OCD is going to come for the ride. I'm not telling you that OCD is not going to come for the ride. It is. But it doesn't mean it gets to drive. And it doesn't mean it gets to have a say in anything other than, oh, yep, there you are. But you know what? I am on my way to doing what I want to do. And that you're not going to stop me. So, again, thank you for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope that you have a great